All right. Hello and welcome to today's Wyoming Community Navigator Program webinar. We are so glad that you've joined us today for our presentation. My name is Mandy Bailey and I am the Advising and Education Director for the Wyoming Community Navigator Program. I'll be your facilitator today, working behind the scenes to assist the best I can with any technical difficulties that may arise, which hopefully there are none, and questions you may have, which hopefully there are plentiful. You may want to monitor the chat. We're going to be posting some helpful links and information. This webinar is being recorded and we will send out a link to all participants about a day after its completion. The Wyoming Community Navigator uses, it's funded by the U.S. Small Business Administration and utilizes the Wyoming Entrepreneurial Support Network to reduce barriers that all small businesses often face, including those owned by groups such as veteran, women, and those from rural communities and communities of color. The Wyoming Community Navigator Program uses a hub and spoke model to pursue its goals. Through collective efforts, the hub and spoke provide training, mentorship, access to capital, and access to other resources to help business owners build resiliency and ultimately be the driving force behind Wyoming's economic recovery. Today's presentation of Growing Your Business Remotely is presented by both Bridget Manley and Daniel Patterson. Bridget is an e-learning specialist with a passion for helping learners become effective agents in their careers and in their communities. She co-founded Ascendant Design and Training with her husband, Daniel Patterson, in July of 2020. Before that, she was the curriculum manager for a Denver-based startup company where she developed compliance and manufacturing training for the state legal cannabis industry. And Daniel is a software systems developer with over 30 years of multidisciplinary experience in software, electronic, and mechanical design. He's been very involved in several different industries, including logistics, gaming, music, and heavy equipment, to name a few. In those industries, Daniel has managed projects large and small and has overseen research, development, engineering, and IT departments, and has managed the implementation and upkeep of automated production systems. So without further ado, we're going to hear from both Bridget and Daniel.
All right. Well, thank you, Mandy. As always, we're happy to be with the Community Navigator Program. And today we're going to be talking about how you can grow your business remotely. And a lot of this kind of comes down to how you can expand your reach into a virtual space while at the same time reducing costs. So I'll let Daniel get our slide deck started. We have some slides, but
I'll need to have that enabled. The host
Oh.
has disabled the screen sharing.
Okay, we'll get that fixed up. Well, they're working.
Should be able to. Are you able to now?
Okay, there we go. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so yes, today we're talking about how to grow your business remotely, going virtual to expand your reach and at the same time reduce your costs. Next slide, please. So normally, in past webinars, we'll introduce ourselves and kind of go over the kind of what you'll learn today, but we're going to shake it up a little bit and actually start with a discussion question. We'd like this webinar today to be interactive and engaging. So we would want so we want to give you an opportunity straight off the bat to go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourself. Feel free to drop into the chat what type of business you own or plan to own if you don't own one currently. And if you're comfortable sharing this, go ahead and tell us what brings you here today. What about running a virtual business sounds interesting to you? And what specific questions might you have? If you want to drop those into the chat, we can review those in just a minute, and we'll try to customize the presentations so that we'll answer some of those questions you have. So again, go ahead and feel free to drop into the chat what type of business you own and what brings you here today. So while you're thinking about that, we'll go ahead and start with our introduction, and then we'll come back to those questions in just a moment. Next slide, please. So a little bit about us, as introduced, we're Bridget Manley and Daniel Patterson. I'm the head of services for Ascendant Design and Training. I'm also the chief learning officer for the company. And like most business owners, I wear a lot of hats. One of my main roles, though, is being a learning experience designer. And that's a fancy word for, for saying that I analyze the needs for our clients, which are mostly companies, and help them develop custom training solutions that helps their employees do their jobs better. So in that particular role, I draw also on my role as an e-learning designer. So I actually develop tools like job aids and interactive learning modules, as well as provide some consultation on effective adult learning practices. Daniel, my husband and business partner, is our chief technical officer, and he's the king of all things tech at Ascendant Design and Training. He kind of heads the products side of the house. And he is very knowledgeable in terms of Microsoft Teams and a lot of the different software that we work with. Okay, so next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what we'll do today. We're going to start by identifying the key characteristics of a remote business. And then from there, we'll explore the benefits and challenges of running your business remotely, so you can decide if it's a good fit for you and where you're currently at in your business. From there, we'll explore some of the tools, skills, and mindsets you need to run an effective virtual business. And throughout all this, we really encourage you to interact with us and to also interact with other attendees. I know from my own experience that just going to webinars, one of the things that I get the most value out of is, in addition to listening to the speaker, is also interacting with other attendees who might have similar problems or similar questions. So again, feel free to engage in whatever way feels comfortable to you. You're always welcome to drop in the chat thoughts and questions. We're going to pause throughout the session. So during those pauses, feel free to unmute your microphone and ask a question if you're comfortable with that. We just ask that when you're not speaking, just go ahead and mute your microphone so it'll cut down on any background noise. And with that, I'm going to jump over to the chat. And I see we have one response from Zachary. I own an apparel company. It's a web-based company, and I'm excited to learn how I might be able to expand my reach while using website. Yeah, definitely. Excellent. That sounds really cool. Yeah, we'll touch on some strategies you can use to expand your reach to reach other markets, maybe outside of your geographical area. So excellent. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so let's start by defining what a remote business is. Just to kind of preface this, I use the terms remote and virtual interchangeably. Basically, it's the same thing. In either case, it refers to a business where most or all of the business is conducted virtually somehow, either through email, phone, or a combination of that and some online tools as well. Now, it's important to note that you don't have to be fully online to be considered a remote or virtual business. There are some different models, including a hybrid model where maybe some of your clients or customers are in person and some of them are online. So you can definitely do that too, but we're going to cover all of those bases just in terms of, anytime you're working or at least doing part of your work virtually, we're going to consider that a remote business for the purposes of this webinar today. Another key characteristic is that a virtual business is not limited to a single location, right? A virtual business can do business with people all across the country and in some cases all across the world. I currently have a friend who's also a consultant and freelancer, and one of her main clients is in the UK. So she's often answering emails at 10 o'clock at night, her time. It kind of just depends on kind of where you want your business reach to be, but you can really reach a lot of different areas if you go remote. Similarly, a lot of remote businesses will hire employees or contractors remotely as well. For instance, in the circles that I run in with other instructional designers who are running their own businesses, one of the first people that they'll either contract or hire virtually will be a virtual assistant, somebody who can just kind of manage all the day-to-day stuff for them. And those people work completely virtually through different communication tools, and it actually works pretty well. So that's another characteristic of some businesses. And finally, and probably most importantly, remote businesses rely heavily on, usually on online infrastructure. So that's, of course, your internet. That's, of course, all the tools that come with that. That's essential for establishing and growing the business. Okay, just going back to the chat, I see we have a comment from Georgia. We own a technology R&D company. Cool. Develop non-destructive test instrumentation and consult on electronic ultrasonic tech grants and business administration. I'm currently doing some business admin consulting online and would like to expand that part of our operations. Wow, that's a cool business. That sounds awesome. That's kind of like in our neck of the woods, kind of adjacent. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, hopefully we'll have some tips for you today on how you can expand that consultative part of the business that you're looking to do. Excellent. Next slide, please. So before we get into the pros and cons of running a virtual business, you probably want to know how exactly do you get clients and customers. That's an important thing to know as well. There are some several options you can use for finding clients and customers online. One of them would be virtual marketing. And you can do this on several different platforms, including Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. You can also use virtual advertising. Sorry, I have these animated in the wrong order. So that's me. Sorry about that. You can use virtual advertising, and one of the biggest ones for that would be Google Ads. That's a really common one if you're doing a virtual business. It'll show little banner ads. There's also different ways you can get your business advertised by using specific keywords. All different ways you can get your business easily found on the internet. Social networking is actually one that I personally rely on very heavily for developing the client side of the business, just because it's kind of a more low-key and less pressurized way of building connections with potential clients. You can also look at maybe joining some different professional groups online. A good place to look for those would be LinkedIn. I think it's a good source. You can find either colleagues within your specific industry if you just want support or if you want to, get ideas, or you can join professional groups for customers and clients in your target industries. So if you want to start cultivating relationships, again, with potential clients or customers, that's a good route as well. We kind of mentioned this earlier, but social media is another tool you can use. I personally have found a lot of luck with cultivating relationships through LinkedIn, but depending on the type of business you do, you might also find value in Facebook or Instagram. Just kind of depends on what you're selling. And finally, another thing to consider is conferences, especially virtual conferences. One of the effects of the pandemic is that more conference venues have not only gone to a virtual or hybrid model, but a lot of them are actually considering staying in the virtual or hybrid model, simply because it cuts down on costs and it's more accessible to a wider range of people. Conferences, as you probably know, are a great way to find potential leads and collaborators. And when you take that online, you can have that same effect of meeting with people and building those connections, while at the same time not having to spend all the money for a plane ticket and a hotel room and all that stuff. So you get all the benefits with only a fraction of the cost. Okay. Any questions or thoughts so far? Feel free to unmute your microphone or drop a question in the chat.
Bridget, do you use a premium version of LinkedIn?
Actually, no, I just stick with the free version. It's done well for me so far.
Okay.
Yeah, good question though. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, let's do the next. Oh, sorry, I see. Yes, Georgia asked, will slides and recording be available? Yes, they will be after the session. Okay, next slide, please. So now let's talk about some of the benefits of running a business remotely. We'll kind of do, the whole scope, starting with the benefits and then going with some of the challenges. But let's start with the good stuff. One of the biggest benefits of taking your business virtual is you can expand your customer base, which it sounds like from the comments we've had so far, that's one of the main interests, is being able to reach a wider range of clients. You can definitely do that when you take your business virtual. Another advantage is that it also can help you reduce your costs, simply because running a virtual business requires less physical infrastructure than a brick and mortar business. For instance, you don't have to worry about renting a building or purchasing office furniture. For that reason, it's a really good option for self-funded or bootstrapped business ventures. If you're not familiar with that concept, we did a webinar about bootstrapping your small business a few weeks ago. So if you're interested in learning more, you can go to the SBDC website and find the recording for that webinar as well. Another advantage of going virtual is that it helps you build more resilience into your business. When you're not tied down to one specific geographical location, you have options in case the local economy around you may not be doing so great. So, again, it helps you be able to find more clients outside of your area and branch out just a little bit. And, again, just gives you some more options. Another advantage too, and this might fall maybe under the more reduced costs kind of bullet point, but another nice thing about working remotely is that you can get the benefit of working with big city clients without living in the big city and paying the higher cost of living for doing so. So again, like if you're in a place where it might be a little bit more rural or say like a little bit more affordable, you can still land those bigger clients that usually have bigger resources and honestly, sometimes deeper pockets, but still have the benefits of having a lower cost of living. The final advantage, and I think this is probably one of the bigger ones, is that working your business remotely gives you greater life-work balance. Now, as you'll notice, I kind of flipped that. People usually say work-life balance, but I personally like to emphasize the life aspect of that particular balance, because I think really balancing your life around your work making your work fit around your life rather than the other way around is probably the healthier way to do that. Fortunately, working from home and working remotely is a lot more normalized and accepted than it was just a few years ago. So in my experience, it's been that most clients and customers really don't mind where you work or what hours you work. As long as, as long as you're responsive to them in their moment of need, whatever else you do outside of that is, kind of your life, and you get to choose how and when you work. Another advantage is that you simply cut down or eliminate altogether the costs of commuting, which, as we all know, with the price of gas, that is a huge advantage. Again, another cost savings you can look at. And with this too is also the concept that clients and customers themselves usually are more open to doing remote work simply because they want to be able to work from home. They want to be able to shop from home and have those same advantages that you do. So it's kind of a win-win situation in that regard. Next slide, please. At the same time, we want to be realistic and consider also some of the challenges of running a remote business. So here are some of the top ones. The first one is that depending on your current level of knowledge and expertise, running a remote business might have a steep learning curve, at least at first. This is simply because you're learning a lot of tech tools, and these tools tend to change constantly. So you need to keep learning to stay ahead and to stay on top of those tools as they evolve. Along with that, as we all know, if we've ever been on anything virtual, which I'm sure we all have in the past couple of years, is tech issues that come up all the time at the worst timing possible. So if you're taking your business remotely and you're relying more and more on technology infrastructure, you'll either have to invest the time into learning how to fix those issues yourself, or maybe you invest the resources in finding third-party tech support that you can lean on when you do have an issue. In either case, you want to make sure that you have either the expertise in-house or out of house to solve those issues as they come up. The third point is, common to starting any business, so it's nothing new, but it's kind of more prevalent or more pronounced when you're working remotely, which is you really need to be self-starting and self-motivating. Simply because when you're working from home, no one can see what you're doing or when you're doing it. So sometimes when you come across a really tricky problem, you're like, I don't want to deal with this. I'm going to do laundry instead. No judgment. We've all been there, right? But just to keep in mind that it really does take a little bit more discipline and effort to stay focused and stay on top of things when you're working from your own home rather than going to an actual business location. Along with that, because you are, maybe working from your home or from a smaller area, you might experience, honestly, some loneliness. This is something that a lot of freelancers talk about, is just the idea that, sometimes it can be a very lonely enterprise. So along with that, another potential challenge is just learning to build relationships virtually rather than face to face. And this is relationships with everyone from your clients and your customers, as well as to, maybe your professional network, your business friends, your mentors, the people who you lean on, the people who you ask for help from. All of that has to be done virtually. And if you're not familiar with, with how to build connections online, it can be a little bit, again, of a learning curve, learning how to do that successfully. The final challenge, and this is probably one of the most pernicious and probably widespread ones, is learning how to set boundaries with your work. When you work from home, it's really easy to justify working all the time, but that is also a recipe for burnout and hating your job. You definitely don't want to do that. So it's really important to make sure that you set boundaries with when and where you work. One of the most common pieces of advice, but it's actually very useful, is to simply set business hours for yourself. So that way you have a very hard boundary. For example, like, don't work after 6 p.m. or, whatever it works out for you, but to set a hard time at, which you start work and at which you end work. Setting boundaries with where you work can be important too, simply because I was actually talking to a friend on LinkedIn about this maybe last week. One of the most common things we see when people talk about the benefits of working remotely is you can work on the beach. And it's like, maybe you shouldn't work on the beach. Maybe you should relax on the beach. So, again, just set boundaries with where you work as well. If you're going to relax, close the laptop and relax. If you're going to work, focus and work, but make sure that those two don't bleed in together too much. With that, I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions or thoughts that you'd like to share.
Bridget?
Real quick,
Okay.
as far as like networking socially, how do you go about like approaching people, or I guess like befriending somebody over LinkedIn or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're going to touch on this in the next webinar that we're doing on the 18th, I believe, on networking, but it's kind of a quick 10,000 foot overview. I found the easiest way to build connections with people is to start small and slow. So like when somebody posts something that you really like, maybe, give them a thumbs up and then comment and say, hey, that's a really great idea. And then just see if you can get a conversation started with them. Something else you can do too is, just send them a message or, say like a connection request and, give them a reason for why you're connecting, saying like, hey, I really liked your profile. We're in the same industry. I'd love to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. I think it's probably pretty common that people are more likely to respond to connection requests that come with a specific introduction and an ask. So those are two easy, simple ways you can start kind of building that relationship. And then from there, you can start, maybe scheduling times to meet on Zoom or, send them emails back and forth or, however they prefer, however they prefer to communicate. But just kind of, start with an opener and just kind of see what their receptivity is. Does that help?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Oh, okay. Tanner has a good question. How do you build trust virtually with potential clients through your website? That's a really good question. I'm not an expert in web design, but I do know that from our own experience, it seems like when you're very straightforward and when you use clear, concise language, I think that goes a long way to help building trust with people. just having that kind of conversational tone and how you write your marketing copy for your website, I think can do a lot to build that relationship. That and having plenty of calls to actions and opportunities for them to connect with you. So make it very easy for them to find you, whether it's sending, whether it's a contact form on your website, and, say like an email address and a LinkedIn profile, anything you can give them so they can reach out to you, I think does a lot to help building that potential trust. Now, that being said, I don't think you can lean on your website completely, to get that kind of connection. I think part of it is going out where people are at, whether it's in webinars or on LinkedIn or wherever else, and putting yourself out there. But I think your website can start building that relationship simply in the way that you communicate with people and the tone you use. I hope that's helpful. Okay, thank you. Cool. Awesome. Great questions. Thanks so much. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Now that we've talked about the advantages and challenges, let's talk about some questions you want to ask yourself to decide if your business is ready to go remote. The first one, pretty straightforward, and probably the one you want to ask yourself straight out of the gate is your work limited to a single geographical area? Because if it is, then remote work may not be as much of an option. So for example, say you're working in food service. That typically isn't a kind of industry that lends itself well to remote work, although there are exceptions. I was pleasantly surprised by a client last year who sent me a thank you gift that was a box of cookies from a company in Utah, I think, that bakes cookies and ships them off fresh. And I was like, how fresh are these really? And I tried them and they were actually very good. So all that being said, basically, yes, consider whether or not your work is limited to a single geographic area, but also give yourself permission to kind of think creatively. Are you really that limited, or are there some ways you can maybe get around that limitation? The second point you want to ask yourself, and this is vitally important, is are you willing to work with new technology? Because again, when you're running a virtual business, you'll be relying on that technology very heavily. You also want to take stock of what your resources are. And of course, that includes, say like your finances, as well as your existing technology tools, the ones that are working well for you and the ones maybe you want to, invest in later. You also want to consider your network. Your network is probably one of your most valuable resources. You might have people in your network who either have been running a virtual business for a very long time and maybe are willing to give you some pointers, or maybe you have some people who are in the same boat as you. They're thinking about starting up too, and maybe you have the same questions and can help each other out. So make sure to consider all your resources, kind of those hard financial resources, as well as the other ones that are available to you. And then finally, this isn't a make or break question, but it's something to consider, is what's your work style? If you're one of those people who loves to be in a social environment and likes to chat with people around the water cooler, then taking your business remote might be an adjustment. Now, that's not to say that you can't do it. Again, like you can create kind of that interaction and that water cooler moment around other virtual platforms. Again, say like LinkedIn, or professional groups that might meet on Slack or another kind of chat channel. You can still build that into your day. You just have to be, a bit more flexible in doing that virtually. Now, if you're someone like me who just likes to be alone in their office for hours at a time, head down, then, remote business could really be a good fit for you because you like just to work by yourself uninterrupted. So that's a nice advantage too. So again, it's not a make or break thing, but just be aware of what your work style is and what you're comfortable with. Okay. Any thoughts or questions before we move on to tools and mindsets? Okay, cool. Next slide, please. Okay, so in this next section, we're actually going to look at some tools and mindsets that you'll need to be successful running your business virtually, if you decide that's something you'd like to do. And we'll start with kind of the more basic stuff first, which is the hardware. Of course, you want to start with fast, reliable internet. Fortunately, there are lots of online tools you can use to test your internet speed. If you just go to Google or whatever browser you have and type in internet speed test, there'll be several options that'll come right up, and then you can actually test your network speed. Now, there is there really is no hard and fast rule of how fast it has to be, but you definitely want the upload and download speed to be within the megabits per second range at least. So again, megabits per second, 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, it needs to be within that range. Another thing you need to have, obviously, is some sort of computer, whether it's a laptop or a desktop computer. Kind of depends on what you're doing. If you like to work, say like in a coffee shop, or if you do most of your work is like writing, a laptop could be a really good choice. Now, if you're someone like me who does a lot of stuff that's, like e-learning development and requires a lot of memory and speed and stuff like that, you may want to consider getting a desktop computer instead. One thing I know that a lot of my colleagues really enjoy is having multiple screens. It's not necessary, but if you're doing a lot of things at once, that might be a setup that maybe you aspire to. So you don't have everything on one small screen. But whatever you do, make sure that it's going to be suitable for you and what you do every day. Two other things you want to invest in right off the bat would be a good webcam and a high quality headset or earbuds. Fortunately, webcams are not too expensive. I prefer the Logitech brand. Those have always worked well for me. These headphones I got just recently for like, I don't know, 25, 27 bucks, and they're actually very high quality. If you're looking for high quality audio, I would really recommend actually looking online at Amazon for some of the products marketed toward the gaming community, simply because they typically do have very good audio and microphones, but they're a little less expensive than what you might see for a professional or business setting. So that's a tip that you can use when you're looking for those types of tools. Next slide, please. Okay, so next we'll look at some of the software you'll need. And this is a little bit more of a kind of expansive list. To start off, you'll want to have some sort of what we call asynchronous communication tool. That's a fancy way of saying some way you can communicate with your clients or customers in a not like, where you don't have to be in a place communicating at the same time. So a good example of an asynchronous tool would be email. You can send an email, they can respond at their convenience. Very simple. Other tools you can use that are becoming more popular include Slack, which, if you're not familiar with Slack, it's a platform where you have different what they call channels. And those are kind of like rooms, you can think about it that way, or different topics. And then within those channels, people post comments or thoughts or questions, and then you can respond to them. Slack is a very easy tool to use comparatively to some other tools, for example, like Microsoft Teams. So if you're not familiar with these kind of like chat platforms, Slack could be a really good place to start. The next thing you want to think about is some sort of project and or task management tool. This will really help you keep organized and make sure that you're hitting all the bases, especially as your business expands and you have more clients or more products or more projects specifically. We are currently right now using ClickUp. That's a web-based tool that has worked really well for us so far. It allows you to create tasks, put them in separate lists that you can order around, like, for example, different projects. And you can also communicate to your team members in those tasks as well. So again, like, say maybe you have a virtual team and you need to communicate with them and make sure that everything's getting done on time. You can use those tasks, not only organize the work, but also communicate to people as well. But of course, there are lots of options out there for project management tools. Other popular ones include Monday.com, Asana, and Trello. I've used Trello before as well. It's a very good tool. It kind of organizes everything in what's called a Kanban board, where you have different columns for different statuses, for example, and you just move a task from one column to the next. So when it's When it's in progress, it's in the in progress column. When it's done, you move it to the done column, and it's very easy to see and know exactly what's happening at any time. You'll also want to make sure you have some sort of reliable video conferencing software. As you probably know, Zoom is probably one of the more popular ones right now, but there are other tools as well, including, again, Microsoft Teams, or Google has their own platform called Google Meet. If you're not familiar with video conferencing, Google Meet could be a really good option to start with. It's very simple. It's designed so it's easy to get into and easy to get out of, but it still gives you high quality video at the same time. And finally, you want to think about file sharing software. Now, this is important regardless of whether or not you're working directly with clients, or if you're working on some kind of product and maybe you have to communicate to, collaborators or to, other people helping you in development. Simply because you want to make sure that you can transfer different files securely and immediately, either with your team or with your clients. So one of the more common ones that you've probably heard of is Google Drive. If you have a Google email address, you automatically have Google Drive with a small amount of memory. So that could be a good way to kind of like, maybe build your way into that. We personally use Microsoft Teams, which we've had really good luck with. We really enjoy. Microsoft Teams, by the way, is a productivity suite that includes a lot of the tools rolled into one. So it includes file sharing, file managing, chat, video conferencing, and a lot of other things. Now, of course, those do come at a higher kind of price point, but especially if you're looking to manage a lot of different files, or if you're communicating a lot with collaborators, Microsoft Teams is a good option. Okay. And Georgia asks, what file sharing for sensitive documents like accounting and IP do you recommend? That's a really good question. Dan, do you mind responding to that one? I think that one might maybe fall more into your purview.
Okay, well, a lot of these actually do Dropbox and a number of other different file sharing systems, as well as Microsoft Teams and Google Drive. If you have the premium versions of any of those, they allow you to set permissions, according to who should or should not access certain files. And Teams pretty much comes out of the box with the permissions capable settings, but since Bridget and I are on our system are the only ones using those files, it's usually basically open to the team. But yeah, almost all the systems, once you get into the pay mode, will allow you to set permissions on those.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so kind of the takeaway is, it will take some investment, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely like, there are definitely different options for that. Did that answer your question, Georgia? Hope that was helpful. Okay. If you have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Again, thanks for asking those. This really helps. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so finally, we'll just talk about a few other tools you might consider. These are not required or anything, but just a couple of nice to haves. First is a good source for software training and tutorials. Now, fortunately, a lot of software developers will create really good documentation, how-to guides and video tutorials for how to use their software. A lot of times that will be built right into the software itself. If you go to the help menu, that'll usually be, again, documentation, this is how it works kind of stuff. There might be links to videos you can watch. As well as if you go to the software producer's website, they usually have really good tutorials there as well. Another good resource for software training is YouTube, believe it or not. They have a wide range of tutorial videos for a very wide range of software tools. Now, just a word of caution, not all tutorials are made the same. Some are better than others. So a good strategy when you're using one of these tutorials is simply to open up the platform as, to open up the platform as you're watching the video and see if you can follow along with the steps that they give you. But that's another option to look for as well, for software training. And then finally, something you might consider would be some kind of dedicated office space where you work. Now, again, this is optional. It kind of depends on what your resources are, as well as, what you prefer. I know that I like to have a designated space, but some people, like to hot desk, fancy term for just working in different places. Some people like to work, say at the local library or at the coffee shop, or at the kitchen table. It kind of depends on where you're at and what you like. But at the very least, the space that you work in should have minimal distractions and a place where you can, get your work done in a fairly focused environment. Okay, next slide, please. So the last part we're going to cover are some of the skills and mindsets. And this is kind of, I think this is probably the more essential part in terms of making your virtual business run. It's just having those particular abilities mentally and cognitively to deal with whatever comes at you. So the first one you'll probably need is strong communication skills. Simply because so much of virtual work happens through written form, whether it's chat, email, comments, etc. Having very strong written communication skills is really important for having a successful online business. That being said, you also want to make sure that you're comfortable communicating through a video conferencing setup as well. And of course, that just comes with practice. Some people are more comfortable with that than others, but those are two kind of communication skills that you want to make sure that you're at least honing continually so you stay up with those. Another really good skill to have is responsiveness. And this is just how quickly you're able to communicate or respond back to people when they contact you. There's a very high chance of getting, as the kids say these days, ghosted online. That means you just disappear without a trace and no one knows what happened to you. And because of that, people feel really sensitive to not getting a response within a certain time frame. Now, this doesn't mean that, this doesn't mean to say that you have to respond within 5 minutes or something when you get, say, like an email or you get a ping on Slack. But my personal rule is to try to respond within an hour. I would say, maximum maybe, a couple hours, just so that people know that you're there, you're responsive, and you're responding to their needs. And this applies to all different platforms. I know that when I work with clients, I have some who like to, do work through email. Some of them like to, call me on the phone. Some of them like to use Slack or something like that. So I'm constantly monitoring all those different platforms to make sure that I'm responding to them in a timely manner. The next one you want to consider developing is mental agility. Just because there's so much stuff that's coming at you and it's kind of unexpected sometimes. Of course, you're going to have IT issues, usually at the worst times possible. You're going to have a problem that arises that you just don't know how to solve right away. Just the ability to be flexible and kind of roll with the punches and keep your expectations moderated is a really, that's a really good skill to have as well. Another good mindset is just the ability to learn new software and just to learn in general. I think one of the really good kind of quick shorthand acronyms for that is ABL, always be learning. And this is true especially for software, simply because a lot of software developers now are what software lingo says is permanent beta, which means they're constantly being updated all the time. So you might see a new feature someday that just pops up out of nowhere and you're like, what does this do? I don't know. So you just have to constantly be willing to invest in that and learn as that specific platform evolves. You also want to have the skills to manage your work virtually. And this is very similar to, how you manage your work on a day-to-day basis, just with the added layer of that tech tool intervening as well. So you want to make sure that you can set and meet your deadlines. Of course, you want to be able to, create a budget and stay within it, as well as communicating with clients. Again, across multiple platforms, and the ability also to communicate proactively. So when you know that, say there's a hang up coming down the road that you didn't expect, or maybe this deliverable will be a day later than you expected, just the ability to communicate with that proactively goes a long way towards making your virtual business successful. Another skill to develop is the ability to work in a hybrid environment. And again, hybrid is a combination between face-to-face and online. Simply because when you're working online only, it's really easy to let those face-to-face social skills atrophy. I know there are times when I'm working online all the time and I can, communicate very well on email, and then I go to the grocery store and I can't for the life of me remember how to communicate to somebody in person. So you just want to make sure that you're honing both of those skills at the same time. And finally, if you need it, you might want to consider creating external accountability for yourself. And there are some really creative ways to do this. I'm not sure if you've heard of this term yet, but there's a kind of an emerging trend called virtual co-working. It's when you hop on, say, like a Zoom call with a friend or a colleague, and the both of you just work for an hour. And that sounds kind of goofy, but the whole idea is that you're building external accountability. So during that hour, when you really have to get something done, if you get up to walk off to, do your laundry, your friend is going to notice. So it's just one of those tools you can use to make sure that you're creating the systems in place you need to be successful. And that's not, of course, a knock on anybody who needs that accountability. I think we all need kind of a little nudge once in a while. Something I do for myself that's really worked well is when a client hasn't given me a deadline for deliverable, I myself will give them a deadline and say, I will have this to you by end of day Tuesday or whatever. That way, I just know I've communicated it to the client and they have that expectation to receive it by that time. So that just gives me that extra nudge to say I have to get it done by this time. Now, if you have other, tips or strategies you use, basically to keep yourself motivated and on track when you're working, remotely or otherwise, feel free to share those in the chat. Because again, those are really good skills to have as well. Okay, next slide, please. So that's all that we had for you today. But I would love to hear any thoughts or questions you might have. Anything that we maybe didn't cover, or something you'd like to learn more about. Feel free to drop those in the chat or unmute your microphone if you're comfortable with that. Okay, Tanner asks, any tips for hiring and coordinating employees virtually? Yeah, that's a good one. I have not had the I have not had the experience so far of hiring people virtually, but I can tell you that coordinating virtually, yeah, that can be kind of a challenge. I would say, from my own experience, probably one of the best things you can do is have a really good tool that helps everyone stay up to date on what's happening at any given time. And again, this is where a tool like a tool like ClickUp might be useful. In ClickUp, you can, basically assign tasks to someone, and you can also assign watchers. So if you delegate a task to somebody, you can make yourself a watcher so you can keep updated on what's happening on that task. You can set different task statuses, so you know when it's in progress, when it's waiting on a dependency, when it's in review. And then, just reaching out to people once in a while and saying, hey, are you encountering any problems? Anything I can do to help you? Tools like that can really help you, stay, motivated and also stay up to date with what's happening with those tasks. In terms of hiring, I would recommend, working with somebody who maybe has had some experience working remotely, simply because, again, there are so many just unique skills and mindsets required to work remotely successfully, that would be something to look for, just that they've worked, virtually in some capacity. Dan, do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I would say that that would be the main skill that you would want to look for, aside from the particular skill that you're hiring for, is that the candidate is able to be fully productive in an online capacity, and to really produce what needs to be produced in the team.
Right. You may want to ask them too, kind of what project management tools they're familiar with, and how they communicate. Again, whether it's email, Slack, whatever, that'll just give you a better idea maybe of their working style. Something else you want to consider too, this actually just came up today on LinkedIn, and it was a really good point, is to make sure that when you're putting out, say like your job description, that you're very clear on the, basically the nature of the role. A lot of times people will say like, this position is, basically remote, but it requires time in the office. So that's not exactly fully remote. That's kind of a hybrid situation. So if it is going to be 100% virtual, call it remote. And if it's going to be some time in the office, make sure that you're very clear on that, because sometimes people will be looking for those jobs and they're like, hey, I live across the country. This will be great. But if it requires some time in the office, that, that won't exactly work for them. Okay, Georgia says, I'm particularly interested in detailed suggestions for reaching out to potential clients, so marketing, who are known to be in the right space to use the specific service we're offering. Okay, I would recommend going on to maybe LinkedIn and finding if there are any groups, say like professional groups specific to the industry or the type of need that your service would fill. Because that's where you're going to find people who are congregating around that particular, job type or, or need. And then you can start building connections and relationships with people in that group, and actually understand their needs a little bit better. I would also caution against automatically going in with like a sales pitch. I mean, just because I've been in those groups and I've seen that, and it's a little bit off-putting. But again, just kind of nurturing those, just kind of nurturing those relationships, seeing what people need. And then once you know them a little bit better, you can actually come to say, hey, like I have this service, I can help you with this. And it's been my experience that people are more likely to work with you if they know you a little bit better. Does that make sense? And does that help? Because I definitely know what you mean. Like I'm in that same boat a lot where I'm trying to find people who, could need the specific service that I'm in. Yeah, exactly. The sales pitch problem. Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. Like I can't sell Girl Scout cookies to save my life. So doing a sales pitch is something I'm not comfortable with. And it's something I could probably work on too. But, one way you can get around that is simply kind of more like the soft, not even a soft sell, but you're just more interested in building relationships and building value. And from that relationship, there comes, there comes an opportunity to collaborate. Kind of the caveat there is that usually takes a lot more time than simply a sales pitch. I'd also recommend maybe refining your sales pitch a little bit and seeing if there might be, again, people in your LinkedIn network or people in your professional groups who might be open to that as well. But for me, I found that building relationships is a kind of a less intense way to start actually building some of those client relationships. That's a great question. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, cool. Well, thank you. Again, if you're interested in learning more about networking or how to build relationships with clients, feel free to come to our next webinar. I believe that is the 18th, October 18th. Thank you.
October 18th at 11 a.m.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes. We'll have more thoughts and ideas on how to build networks and how to start network, how to network with clients and potential customers. So yeah, definitely feel free to come to that. So thank you. Thank you all for your participation and your great thoughts today.
Yes, and thank you, Bridget and Daniel. We love having you guys here. You always have so much valuable information. It's always tremendous to have you guys with us. So thank you. As Bridget mentioned, we will be back again October 18th at 11 a.m. So please join us for Networking 101 for small businesses. And as always, we do have a brief survey following the conclusion of this. If you wouldn't mind filling that out, that really helps us to be able to offer webinars that are beneficial to everyone. So everyone have a wonderful day. And again, thank you, Bridget and Daniel, and we will see you hopefully next time.
Thank you.
Bye.